Here's quarterback update. This one is not as fun as most of them. A lot of layoffs today at ESPN of on-air personalities, 20 in total, big names. And Steve Young was one of them. ESPN has laid off Steve Young, who I think is one of their best football analysts, unfortunately. In our industry these days, it seems to be really common. People who do great work, unfortunately, due to financial circumstances, are not retained. Steve Young was one of the layoffs. Jeff Van Gundy, NBA color analyst who does such a fantastic job, also laid off. LaFonso Ellis, basketball player turned into college basketball analyst. He was let go from ESPN. And, I was let go by ESPN. This is what now, 7 years ago? What is it now? 2023, 2017. When I started with ESPN in 2014, you have to fly out to Bristol, Connecticut, where the headquarters are, to do the rookie minicamp. That's what they call it, to initiate all the new employees. And LaFonso Ellis was in my rookie minicamp. So he was with them for quite a long time. 2014, when I got hired, all the way till now. He lasted a lot longer than me. But former 49ers quarterback, Hall of Famer, Steve Young, you're no longer going to see him on the Monday Night Football pre- and post-game shows. According to multiple reports, Steve Young no longer will be with ESPN. Company obviously looking into cost-cutting measures. I know 49ers fans aren't happy about this. I mean, Steve is just such a wealth of information from what might be a biased perspective of mine. I think that he is the best analyst at helping you step inside the mind of a quarterback. And talking to him over the years about Jimmy Garoppolo, talking to him over the years about Nick Mullins, and now Trey Lance. And this year, I'm sure that we'll talk a little bit more about Brock Purdy and maybe even Sam Darnold, has been so insightful. And it's really interesting because you can take the lessons that Steve Young learned while he was with the 49ers. And I've gotten to write so much about those. I mean, here's an epic picture. This is the moment that Steve Young got over the hump, right? Literally got over the goal line against the Dallas Cowboys to seal the NFC Championship game in January of 1995, get that monkey off of his back. Steve Young went through so much adversity, and he actually went through the seminal quarterback competition that has fueled so much of the discourse surrounding 49ers quarterback competitions now. It was Steve and Joe Montana. All of this experience has added up into Steve being the ultimate wealth of knowledge when it comes to the 49ers quarterback position. And this picture right here that you see, this is a screenshot from a piece that I wrote last year, why Steve Young thinks Trey Lance has the ingredients to be a successful 49ers quarterback. And we get really deep into the psychology, and there's nobody better at talking about that than Steve, because you have to remember, Steve came over from Tampa Bay, where he was considered a bust. The USFL's Los Angeles Express, that league didn't last a long time, went into bankruptcy. Steve played for them in front of empty crowds at the Coliseum, LA Coliseum. That place empty. That's a lot of seats to have only, 2,000 fans at the game. Went from the USFL's Express to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, had some miserable experiences there. The numbers were terrible, but Bill Walsh saw something in Steve Young that made him trade for him before that 1987 season. And now you could draw parallels between Young and Trey Lance and the 49ers, with Mike Shanahan having coached Steve Young and having coached John Elway and having that, epic mix of a precision pocket passer with a quarterback who could also move. I think that Kyle Shanahan also wants that. I think a lot of that fueled his decision to draft Trey Lance as moldable clay. So you can draw those comparisons between Steve and Trey as far as where the development needs to go. But you can probably also draw comparisons between Steve Young and Sam Darnold, right? Sam Darnold's career, even though he's ultra talented, number 3 pick out of USC in 2018, Sam Darnold's career has not begun the way that Sam Darnold has wanted it to. And like Steve Young, he's played in undesirable locations. The New York Jets aren't a great franchise. The Carolina Panthers aren't a great franchise. But the 49ers believe that they can turn Sam Darnold's career around. Will they turn it around to Steve Young level? No, nobody's saying that that's likely. But the same patterns are here. The change of scenery into a place where just yesterday we talked about data showing that Kyle Shanahan is the NFL's top play caller. The change of scenery that could be conducive to a career renaissance is here with the 49ers for Sam Darnold. And Trey Lance also has a great platform for which to succeed. With Steve Young, we talk about platforms from which to succeed. It's a great story. He was sitting behind Joe Montana. And this happened, this persisted for several seasons. Just imagine today's 49ers quarterback discourse and the competitions and the arguments online. Take that, apply Joe Montana, multiple time Super Bowl winner, future Hall of Famer, mix Steve Young into that, and Steve Young was a future Hall of Famer as well. Stretch it out for several years, have the 49ers win titles in the interim, and imagine how obsessively crazy that would have been had social media existed. So this was an absolute pressure cooker. Thankfully, Twitter didn't exist yet in the late 1980s and early 1990s. But that is what Steve Young worked through at the time. And he's told this story before. It's a really, really good one. Steve Young was on a plane from San Francisco to Salt Lake City. And this was, I want to say, in 1991, before the 1991 season, or maybe at some point during the 1991 season, maybe even a little bit later, maybe before 1992. Either way, the 49ers still had Joe Montana. Steve was still in Joe Montana's shadow. And a lot of this noise that was just reverberating off all the walls, it was getting to Steve Young. He dealt with a lot of anxiety because of what was happening. And, who wouldn't really in that kind of situation? He was on a flight to Salt Lake City where he sat next to Steve Covey, who is the author of one of the most famous self-help books of all time, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So Young found himself seated next to Steve Covey, and Steve Young found himself venting to Steve Covey. He was saying, this is all terrible. I'm frustrated. I'm riding the bench. I'm in a situation where I can't succeed. Bill Walsh is holding me back. All this was bad. Everything was bad for Steve Young, and he was frustrated. And Steve Covey, who wrote this book that's a multi-million copy bestseller, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, took a deep breath, heard Steve Young out, let him finish venting, and then proceeded to say, hold on, let me get this straight. You have the best offensive mind in the game of football from which to learn, right? And Steve said, yeah, Bill Walsh is my coach. You have the best quarterback in the history of the game who can tutor you. You can ask him questions, right? And Steve thought about it for a couple seconds and said, yeah, you're right. I have Joe Montana on my team. I can ask him questions. Then Steve Covey said, you're in an organization that is the standard bearer of excellence in the National Football League. The San Francisco 49ers have won 4 Super Bowls over the last decade. Is that not right? Is that not the organization that you're part of? And Steve Young sat for a little while and nodded his head and said, yeah, you're right. Steve Covey turned to him and said, I have never seen anyone in a better position to succeed than you. And Steve Young went from a very negative, pessimistic perspective about having to wait his turn to start, being on the bench, dealing with all this stress. At that moment, he reframed his perspective. He went from negative Nancy about the whole thing to realizing, oh boy, I have a platform that other people don't have. I have a platform where I can see just how good I can get. Most people will live their entire lives in whatever career they're participating in, whatever career they work in. They will spend their entire lives looking for the platform that Steve Young had with the 49ers. Bill Walsh, followed obviously by Mike Shanahan, Mike Holmgren, George Seifert, all those guys. The 49ers, just their legacy, the talent that he had surrounding him, and his mentor, the guy in front of him, Joe Montana. Most people will spend their entire careers looking for that kind of setup, that kind of opportunity, and they'll never get it in their respective works. But Steve Young had it. And it took that meeting for him to realize what he had, to reframe everything in a positive way. And he turned around and started winning MVP awards. MVP in 1992, MVP in 1994, Super Bowl champion in 1994. And at the time of his retirement, Steve Young was the highest rated passer in NFL history. So the story was awesome. And the story is a great one to discuss when we talk about development of somebody like Trey Lance, development of somebody like Sam Darnold, and even the development of somebody like Brock Purdy. Steve Young is a standard bearer of success, and unfortunately let go by ESPN today, because that wealth of knowledge, again, I'll circle back to that anytime he talks football, and thankfully we'll still get to hear him on KMBR, maybe here on the channel through some of my articles. That gives us the perspective that we need, because so much of how the 49ers operate is so intrinsically tied to their dynastic past. I mean, I've drawn these parallels before. Kyle Shanahan was born the year that Bill Walsh took over the 49ers in 1979. Kyle Shanahan is an honorary member of the Bill Walsh coaching tree, because Mike Shanahan was under George Seifert, who took everything that he learned from Bill Walsh, right? And that was passed down. So you see it to today, because obviously Kyle's taken a lot from his dad. You see Kyle using a lot of the techniques, such as filming all of his meetings, that Bill Walsh used in the 1980s. And Kyle Shanahan was the 49ers ball boy when Mike was their offensive coordinator in 1994. That was the year where Steve Young delivered the most impressive Super Bowl performance by a quarterback in NFL history, with 6 touchdown passes against the San Diego Chargers. Now, it was funny. I think it was Jason Kelce, the Eagles center, the other day, said that Jalen Hurts, in the losing effort this past year, had the best quarterback performance in Super Bowl history. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Does Steve Young no longer exist? Steve Young with his 6 touchdown passes against the Chargers. And Mike Shanahan wanted Steve Young to throw 8 touchdown passes in that game. The 49ers had designed a game plan that would allow Steve Young to throw 8 touchdowns, but they were beating the brakes off of the Chargers so badly, right? 49-26 was the final score, that they yanked Steve Young out of the game. Mike Shanahan was upstairs in the booth, and he called down on the phone, the little landline phone that goes to the sideline, angry with the 49ers up 20-plus points in the Super Bowl in the fourth quarter, angry at George Seifert for taking Steve Young out of the game, because Mike Shanahan was so competitive, so focused on his goal, that he wanted Steve Young to throw 8 touchdown passes. That is the greatest QB performance in Super Bowl history. There's no question. The fact that Jason Kelce would have the nerve to say that Jalen Hurts, in a game that he lost, and a game that the Eagles lost in large part because Jalen Hurts fumbled away a touchdown, how you could say that's better than Steve Young's performance in 95, Joe Montana's performance to end the 89 season against the Broncos, where the 49ers won 55-10. Hell, it wasn't even better than Patrick Mahomes on the other side of the football field this past Super Bowl. Mahomes played a cleaner game than Jalen Hurts, and that's a big reason why the Chiefs won. Anyway, I digress. There have been some bad takes here, as you could tell, over the course of this summer on the internet. And that was this has been a good opportunity to address them. Anyway, ESPN laying off Steve Young today. Bad news for 49ers fans. Bad news for football fans in general, because Steve, just such a wealth of knowledge. And it was fun to see him on that platform. Pre and post game Monday Night Football, 22 years with ESPN. That's a long time that Steve Young did a really, really good job for them. While we're on topic of 49ers quarterbacks, why don't we move to 49ers Q&A? Why don't we talk about Brock Purdy? Why don't we talk about Sam Darnold? Why don't we talk about Trey Lance? We could talk a little bit about Steve Young. Hell, if you want to talk about Brandon Allen, we could do that. If you want to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo, we can do that. If you want to go to Jeff Garcia, Joe Montana, Steve Stenstrom, John Brody, we can talk about all those guys as well. Let me pop open the questions and let's go for it. All right, questions in the comment section. Let's do it. I don't see the 49ers making a trade until closer to the deadline, unless it's a micro transaction. This is a question about any possible trades. Jed York, notably at the owners' meetings, unprompted, said that the 49ers, now that they have draft capital again, they're going to have a first-round draft pick for the first time since 2021. They will be in position to potentially pick up another star player ahead of the deadline if they find that to be necessary and financially affordable. So they have $10 million in cap space. They have draft picks. I wouldn't expect a need to be pronounced, though, until the regular season starts. Is Brock Purdy the next Steve Young? Well, I don't think he could run quite like Steve Young. Purdy's got the burst, but Steve Young, I mean, Steve Young is one of the greatest running quarterbacks of all time. We can go through the 49-yard run against the Vikings, the gets away again run. There was a great run against the Rams a few years after that looked a lot like that Vikings run. That it isn't as famous, but from a technical skill set perspective, might have been just as impressive. I mean, Steve Young, even in his old age, even in his final season, starting the whole year, he had a huge run to tie the game against the Indianapolis Colts. That was I think a 14-yard touchdown run, but he had to cover a lot of ground, made it to the pylon. That was actually Peyton Manning's rookie year, and that game was played at Candlestick. So, I mean, Steve, the fact that he was one of the greatest running quarterbacks of all time and also the highest rated passer in NFL history at the time of his retirement, that's awesome, right? And Mike Shanahan had the tremendous enjoyment of being able to coach that Steve Young from 92 to 94, and then John Elway with the Denver Broncos, the two Super Bowls. And John Elway wasn't quite as good of a runner as Steve Young, but he obviously had the arm. He was a great pocket passer, and he was a great athlete. So over the course of the 1990s, you could see the seeds being planted for the 49ers, eventually drafting Trey Lance, right? Because you had Mike Shanahan with the benefit of coaching these dual threat quarterbacks, two of the greatest of all time, in Steve Young and John Elway. Those were formative years for Kyle Shanahan learning the game of football. It's no surprise that Kyle Shanahan wanted to take a big swing to mold a dual threat quarterback of his own in Trey Lance. Unfortunately, injuries have prevented us from seeing how that development would have worked out, but we're going to see a little bit more of how it might work out this season. Want to do 49er broadcasts on the radio? You want to hear Steve Young on the radio? That would be cool. Although Tim Ryan does a great job. Jay Street remembers that Colts game. The Niners were down 8, if I remember correctly. Steve Young scored on that 14-yard touchdown there, ran it in near the pylon. Then they had a 2-point conversion, and then they might have won in overtime on a field goal. Really good game. Peyton Manning in his rookie season. That was 1998. I tend to have a photographic memory. Don't ask me how I know this stuff, but that was totally off the top of my head. I would have been 10 years old watching that game, probably with my grandpa. Porterville, California. Good times. We had it so worked out. We would watch the first half. Halftime in the NFL is 12 minutes long. We would rush down to Domino's Pizza, where we had phoned in an order, pick up the pizza at halftime in his big diesel truck, and then we would head straight back, and we would be back in the big recliner seats in front of the big 1990 style flat screen, not a flat screen, big 1990 style big screen TV that definitely wasn't flat, weighed probably 450 pounds. We'd be back in our seats with the pizza right at the time of the second half kickoff, without fail. We'd do this for several games, and it would always take exactly 12 minutes to run down to Domino's and get the pizza. One of those games was 49ers Colts, Steve Young against a rookie, Peyton Manning. Another one of those games was this. I mean, since we're still talking about Steve Young, why don't we go to this one? This was a bigger game, but the routine was the same. Terrell Owens. Steve Young talked about this one. He called it a family fight because Steve Mariucci developed Brett Favre with the Packers, but Steve Mariucci was the 49ers coach. And Mike Holmgren helped develop Steve Young at both BYU and with the 49ers. And he was the Packers coach. So you had that parallel structure there between the 49ers and the Packers. And you had the 49ers finally exact their revenge against Green Bay. I mean, this was the January 95 NFC divisional game. Packers beat the 49ers 27-17. Steve threw 65 passes in that game because the 49ers didn't have a run game. They didn't have Ricky Waters after 1994. That just shows you any quarterback, no matter how great he is, Steve Young's one of the best of all time, you have to have a balanced offense. You can't have him dropping back 65 times a game or it's not going to work out. Gilbert Brown, Reggie White, those guys tore the 49ers up. But then Owens made that catch, and a deeply personal rivalry broke in the 49ers' favor. Good final picture there. Young, Brett Favre. Post your questions. I don't remember this one. Jay Street says that Young in 95 had a crazy run against the Packers. That's good to know. It's a game I think that has kind of erased from a lot of people's memory on the 49ers side, right? Yeah, I know. I think there was a pick six from the Packers. I think Young threw a pick six in that game, and it was the start of 3 straight playoff wins for Green Bay over the 49ers in consecutive years. And Owens dropped all those passes in that January 99 game. Here's the multiple drops for Terrell Owens. He had 3 or 4. And then, coming off the field after he caught that winning touchdown, he was bawling. Just a emotional moment. I asked Terrell years later what he was thinking about as he was crying, and he said he was thinking about his grandmother who raised him. I mean, that was his most visceral kind of memory and thought at the time, right? As Candlestick is going crazy. So there you see Owens, really evocative of the catch 3. That was the catch 2, right? Because the catch 3 had Vernon Davis in tears coming off the field. 49ers history really is cool. Yeah, the Mark Edwards catch and run on that final drive should have been like a 11-yard loss, and it turned into, I don't know if it was a first down, but it turned what would have been a terrible situation into a manageable one for the 49ers. That whole final drive, I mean, the 49ers caught a break when Jerry Rice fumbled, but it was the year before instant replay was reinstituted, so the fumble didn't count. Officials got the call wrong. That was a big break. The Mark Edwards play was huge for the 49ers. The 49ers signed Charles Haley before that game. He hadn't played in 2 years. They signed Charles Haley for $10,000. He got $10K to play one game, and he had a huge pressure of Brett Favre that led to a Lee Woodall interception that ended up tilting the game in the 49ers' favor, because that was the year that the 49ers lost Bryant Young on Monday Night Football to the massive leg fracture. So they were out of defensive linemen, running on fumes, signed Charles Haley. He played a game for him, played the next week, played well against the Falcons, but that's when Garrison Hurst snapped his leg and they lost by 2 points. I think it was 19-17 to the Falcons. That's a season the 49ers people really regret. They really think they could have had Super Bowl number 6 that season had Garrison Hurst not gotten hurt. Who do I think the best tight end the 49ers have had? Kittle, Vernon Davis, Brent Jones, Greg Clark. Well, Vernon Davis still has the best numbers, but I think Kittle's going to pass him. I think if Kittle stays healthy, when all is said and done, he's going to be at the top of this list. Brent Jones was a winner and was a really good tight end, but as far as athleticism goes, George Kittle and Vernon Davis on a totally different level. I mean, Vernon even faster than George Kittle was really fast. I mean, wasn't Vernon a 4.3 or 4.4 guy coming out of Virginia Tech? George Kittle 4.5, which is really damn fast. Amazing that he dropped to the 5th round. George Kittle, an awesome run blocker. But I mean, Vernon Davis was a player that set the mold for all these tremendously adaptable tight ends led by George Kittle that we see today. So Vernon Davis was a pioneer of sorts. Brent Jones was still a tight end back when those guys were bulkier and slower. The tight end evolved into a wide receiver of sorts, a wide receiver that could block, one of the most athletic players on the football field. And a lot of that happened, and a lot of that was born out of what the 49ers were doing with Vernon Davis and Delanie Walker, who's extremely underrated. I mean, Delanie Walker was an athletic freak as well. Now, the funny thing is that Braden Willis, let me show you guys this. The Braden Willis, 49ers 7th round draft pick, was developed at Oklahoma by this guy right here, Joe John Finley. Joe John Finley was with the 49ers on the practice squad for 2 seasons with Vernon Davis and Delanie Walker. Joe John Finley is now Oklahoma's tight ends coach, where he developed this guy, Braden Willis, who the 49ers just picked in the 7th round. So history comes full circle, doesn't it? Pretty cool. All right, more questions? We'll answer some here. CJ Gray wants the Steve Young podcast. Don't forget Russ Francis, great tight end. Going back a little bit further with Russ Francis, but good call out. Eric Johnson. How do I think the chemistry between Jimmy Garoppolo and Devontae Adams is going to be now that Carr is gone? We'll see. I mean, the Raiders had a lot of problems last year. I think the majority of them were on the defensive side of the football. They also struggled at times offensively. So, they got to fix the defense to a certain extent, and that will allow Jimmy Garoppolo to do what he does, and that's lead the team to wins. But again, the whole roster is important. With the 49ers, the roster thrived, and Jimmy Garoppolo helped elevate everybody else around him. That's what a winner does. The thing with the Raiders is, I mean, no pun intended, it's been a black hole, right? Especially for defensive production. It's got to get a little bit better. I don't think that Derek Carr really got a fair shake there, because the defense would blow all those leads. I think they blew 5 double-digit leads in the second half last year, which was an NFL record. So that's definitely on. Yes, part of it's on the offense for not bleeding the clock out, but you've got to have a pretty damn bad defense that's not very clutch to accomplish that. Do you think that we can see the 49ers special teams unit take a step, assuming everybody stays healthy? I think so, but it depends on Jake Moody's leg, right? Robbie Gould was a really good kicker. Jake Moody can be a really good kicker, but he's got to do it now. He's got to show that he can port his college success and his immense talent to the NFL level. But they've got Wishnowsky back. They've got Tabor Pepper back. I think they could be better in the return game. We'll see what somebody like Ronnie Bell can do for the 49ers. Ray McLeod still on the football team. So, and then you have your special teams aces back for year 2. George Odom, Oren Burks, McLeod, players that you signed to improve that facet of the game. Second year under Brian Schneider. So I think that the natural trajectory is up for the special teams, but Jake Moody, the kicker, that's the most visible component of special teams, has to be good. Now, one area where they can really improve, and I think they will immediately, is kickoffs. They weren't great at kickoffs. Mitch Wishnowsky, not the best kickoff man. Robbie Gould, old, not the best kickoff man. I think they can get better immediately with a younger, fresher leg there. Jay thinks the 49ers should be a great team for bleeding out the clock. Jordan Mason was the closer last year. He could be the closer again. Christian McCaffrey is a damn good closer too. You have him on the field. You can pass, you can run, you could be a multifaceted offense in crunch time. The 49ers have a lot of weapons. Somebody just asked me, how do I feel about covering the team this season? One of my buddies, Harrison, asked me on text message. And I said, this is just such a fun team to cover because they have more star players than any other team in the NFL. Stars up and down the roster. I mean, they were loaded last year and they picked up Javon Hargrave. So you have stars plus quarterback questions plus a pedigree of team cohesion that suggests they have a chance to win a Super Bowl. It's all you can ask for, right? If you're viewing this for entertainment value. So I think that's awesome. Check out Harrison's company, by the way. They're blowing up right now. The Naked Market. It's a food company, and it's essentially turning into this behemoth. They're purchasing different companies, and they're getting exposure on the New York Times and everywhere. They're partnering with the Jonas Brothers for one of their brands of chips. Definitely something that you want to check out. Harrison's company. Harrison and my buddy Alex Cost. Mike wants all the in-season drama that this season has to offer. Mike says that the 49ers quarterbacks, the other Mike Crocker, 49ers quarterback situation will develop organically and we'll find stuff out after camp. And I agree with him. I was talking about this earlier, CJ. Mike coached Steve Young running the West Coast, 92 to 94. They not only ran the West Coast offense, they ran the West Coast. Beat San Diego in the Super Bowl, 49-26, Super Bowl 29. And a really good coaching staff with the 49ers. That's right. as well. All right, great questions today. Thank you, everybody. Not great news for the former 49er, Steve Young. ESPN laid him off today, but we talked a lot about what Steve has brought to not only the game itself, but to analysis of the game, and hopefully we'll hear a lot more about him soon. Everybody have a great Friday evening. Maybe talk to you a little bit later. Take care.